Hello and welcome. My name is Eliseo Rodriguez, and this is Arianism Today. And we are going to just start discussing Arianism and the name Arianism and why I accept it. Arianism is a term that scholars and theologians understand what it means. It defines my faith and what I believe and my opinion on things. It's a very effective term to describe what my faith is. And so Arianism, by and large, is a hated description by people who are Arians, who believe the same way I do, will not accept the name Arian, which is fine. They don't have to. But I do. And so because I accept the name Arian, and not very many others do, I am one of the very few Arians out there. So I know that there's a Catholic Church of Arianism, and I'm not a Catholic, so they don't count in my book. There's a lot of problems with them. So my view, or the reason I don't have a problem with Arianism is because it definitely describes my view to the scholarly and theological world succinctly. And I don't have to go into too much explanation about what I believe when I speak to someone who understands what Arianism is. Although there are a lot of people who don't know what Arianism is and call it Gnosticism and call it all this other stuff. And they because they don't understand and they're ignorant of Arianism, they just spout out some ridiculous notions that are not true at all. But the name was given because Arius was defending the faith against the doctrine of the Trinity trying to be introduced to the church in the 4th century. And so because he was the defender of the faith and because he was the point of the spear in that area, the name stuck with him. But he was taught by a man named Lucian. Eusebius, who was another Arian, the historian of the church, he was also an Arian. He was taught by Lucian as well. The church was not introduced to Arianism by Arius only. Arianism was taught to Arius, and the church itself believes, a lot of the church believed Arianism beforehand. In fact, there were many, if you look at the history of the synods and the councils, there were so many that went to Arians. I think there were like 13 synods and councils that were Arian and only 6 that were Trinitarian. And the last ones were the ones that counted because they pretty much said, we're just going to kill all the Arians after we win, and went after them. So that's what I am as an Arian, and that's why we use the name Arianism. So if you guys got any more questions about Arianism and what we believe, or why we use the term Arian, feel free to ask. The last time we talked about John chapter 1, verse 1, and what we believe and understand about it. It's pretty obvious, I think. But I want to look at, in the same book, in the same chapter, looking at verse 18 and learning from about verse 18. It says in the New American Standard, and not very many Bibles interpret it this way, but according to Daniel Wallace, he says that the oldest papyrus says the way it is in the New American Standard. So it is the oldest section of John, and it says it this way. It says, "No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him." And so the interesting thing about this verse is because it says, no man has seen God at any time. And we know, first of all, that there's a lot of people that said they saw God in the Old Testament. Okay? This verse is saying they did not see God. That no man has seen God at any time. So then it says, the only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. And so he's saying, what is he saying? To me, he's saying, no one has seen God. The only begotten God, who is in the bosom of the Father, that's who was explaining the Father to them. So, and another part of this verse that's really important is that he's called the only begotten God. You say, how is he born God? What does that mean to be born God? Because we know, that God has no beginning and no end, and he's always existed. He is and was and is to come. He's always there. How can he be a begotten God? That doesn't make sense. Being begotten and God doesn't seem to be able to come together. But it does come together because it's talking about the qualitative nature of the one who was born. And I said in the referring to John chapter 1 verse 1, where it says, and the Word was God. You say, when does God ever refer to as being was God? Even when, in the Trinitarian opinions, even when Jesus is 100% man, he's 100% God at the same time. So you don't ever say that Jesus wasn't God during that time as a Trinitarian. And so it shows that the verse, John chapter 1 verse 1, is totally anti-Trinitarian when you see that it says that the Word was God. Talking about it was like the Father, and I explained that God gave birth after his own kind, after his own likeness, after his own image, and that Jesus looks like what God would look like when he was born. And it was an exact representation of the Father. So he's identical to the Father, except that he's born. He's begotten. He has a beginning. And so that alone shows how inferior Jesus is to being the Father. The Father having always been, never having a beginning, never having an ending, never having a death, always alive in every time period. So you understand when in John chapter 1 verse 18 it says, the only begotten God, it's saying this is the only being that was born exactly like God. And that this God-like, made after God's kind, after God's image, like any son would be expected to be, is the one who explained the Father to the people who claim to have seen God. And so because Jesus, the Word, looks so similar to the Father, but is not, when they saw God, they saw his Son who looks exactly like him and identical to him. But, so they didn't see God. They've never seen God. They've seen what the Son looks like when he looks like God, but they've never actually beholden God himself. And so this is what this verse is saying. Obviously, we understand that just being begotten, to Trinitarians, begotten is not part of their vocabulary. They don't admit that. But this verse proves that he was born as in God's form, in God's exact representation, in God's image, in the image of the invisible God. That is what Jesus was born as. The Word was God at one time. He is the only begotten God. No one else has been formed or created or birthed in this way. Only the Word. And so this verse is first of all showing that what I love is that it's showing that obviously the doctrine of the Trinity is wrong, that they're not co-equal, co-eternal, consubstantial, all those things. It's not true. He is begotten. He has a beginning. But then we see that no man has seen God at any time. So that means that he existed in the Old Testament. If you don't believe this, for the Socinians who believe that Jesus only existed after as being the son of Mary and never existed before that. This verse contradicts that by saying that the Son who was in the bosom of the Father, he was explaining him in the past. So it proves that the Socinian view of Jesus only being a man is thrown out the window and proves it unbiblical. But it also proves that Jesus is a begotten God. In other words, begotten qualitatively, his nature is that of God's when he was born. But obviously we know that he is under the Father's authority, that he is not free to do his own thing, that he has been given powers and abilities, but he is always under the Father's authority. So that's John chapter 1 verse 18. Trying to make these videos kind of short. So look into these verses and see if they coincide with each other and that if they make sense to you. Because what I want for you is for you to believe and understand what the truth of the Bible is. And when you get the truth of the Bible, move away from the doctrine of the Trinity and move into the truth. Because I believe that God is bringing us to a point to where we're going to have to leave the doctrine of the Trinity to stay in truth. And I think that now that the truth is being taught, people who are taught it or who learn it are accountable for what they know. And that no longer are they, can they claim ignorance in this area, but that the truth is going to come out more and more, and that the church needs to leave the doctrine of the Trinity and move to the truth. Otherwise, they are anathema. They may lose their salvation because they rejected the truth. Before, when you didn't know and you were ignorant, that's one thing. But when you learn and you find out the truth, then you are accountable for what you know. And you, God can hold that against you. So, and I'm only trying to give people truth. And so, that's all I got for now. If you don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the videos. And if you guys have any questions or want to learn anything or have any questions for me, feel free to throw them at me, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. You guys have a good night. Bye.